Hey, what's up guys? Zach here from RacingSimTools.com, and before you get started with any setup work for a car, you first need to analyze the track, and today we're going to be showing you just how to do that. Before we start working on the car setup, we first need to ask ourselves a few questions and to analyze some data about the track itself. That way we can identify some things that we need to focus on when we're creating the car setup. And the first question we need to ask is, what corners are going to give me the most time benefit if I focus on them? And the reason we ask this question is because when we're creating a car setup, a lot of times we're going to be losing out on others to improve on other areas. So we want to make sure we're getting the biggest bang for our buck, and then we optimize the setup for those corners that we have in mind. We also can look at things like the speed trace to determine the max speed of the track, what speed we're spending most of our time at. Does the track favor more aerodynamic downforce or mechanical grip? Do you need to go with a stiffer suspension setup for a stable aero platform or a softer one for more mechanical grip? Is the track bumpy or smooth? Maybe if it's bumpy, is it bumpy for one specific section of the track, maybe like Sector 3 of Catalonia, or is it bumpy throughout the track? Maybe it's a road track like Long Beach. We also need to think of the tires. What tires are getting worked the hardest? Maybe there's a lot of braking zones. The fronts are going to wear down really fast. Or maybe there's a really high speed sweeping turn where the rear tires are going to cook really quickly. Once we answer some of these questions, we can then use them as a roadmap to develop the car setup and use them as a roadmap to kind of guide us. So now that you guys kind of understand what some of the questions we should be asking are, I'm going to show you guys how you can answer those questions by looking at data. And for this, I'm going to be using the Racing Sim Tool software. However, you could use any software that you could see these same graphs in. So you could use things like Motec or PCAR's Profile or any kind of program you want. But I'm going to be using this software because I developed it. So the first thing that we needed to do is I'm going to come in here and load a lap. So I already collected data. I drove Formula 1 2019 at Catalonia because I like this track a lot. So I have some test data here. I'm just going to open it up and it's going to load up. And then I'm going to select my fastest lap, which was a 26 flat. And then the first thing I'm going to do is navigate to track. And this is going to load up the track states. And remember that first question that we had was, what corners do I want to optimize this setup for? And I'm going to overlay in the video what the track numbers are so you guys can kind of follow along. But typically what you're looking for are really corners before a straight, because that's where you're going to gain the most time at. So looking at this track map, I see that turn 3, turn 9, and turn 16 are all corners where if I get a really good exit, I'm going to make up a lot of time on the straights because there's considerable straights after those turns. So when I'm developing my setup, this is where I'm going to be focusing on the setup. So if I'm getting understeer on any of these turns or oversteer on any of these turns, I'm going to make sure that I affect the balance so that I optimize the setup for these corners so that I can always get the best corner exit, making sure I get the best speeds down the straights where I'm going to have the best opportunity to make up time or to be able to pass people. The next thing we want to look at is the speed profile of the track. And to do this, we can look at the speed histogram down here in the right hand corner. This is going to show us what the speed profile of the given track is. So you can see the x-axis is the different speeds in kilometers per hour, and the y-axis is the time that we spent at that speed for this lap as a percentage. So what we're looking for are normal distributions and peaks. So you can see right around 140 kilometers per hour, there's a peak here, and there looks to be somewhat of a normal distribution. So that's a pretty good indication of maybe where some of our more commonly spent speeds are spent at. And it also looks like maybe at 240, we have another somewhat normal distribution. And why this is important is it actually kind of helps us identify the next question, which is the mechanical versus aerodynamic grip. It helps us identify if we're spending most of our time in a region where aerodynamics are going to come into a large play. So let's go ahead and look at that. So to answer the aerodynamic versus mechanical grip question, we needed to know the speed makeup, which we just did in the last few minutes of the footage. So the next thing we need to consider is the track makeup. And to do that, we're going to look at the track states map. It's telling us for the track what all different regions that the car is behaving for each part of the track. And if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a pie graph, and that's going to tell us how much time we're spending at each one of these states over the lap. So you can see for acceleration, we're only spending about 7% of our time. For braking, 6%. For straight line acceleration, 26.6%. For low speed cornering, 15.5%. And for high speed cornering, we're spending the majority of the time, which is 44.4%. And just looking at the track map, you can see that we are spending a huge amount of time at high speed cornering. Turns, entry to turn 1, exit to turn 2, high speed, turn 3, high speed, turn 4, high speed, turn 5 is not, but pretty much everything except sector 3, again, is high speed. And we kind of know that already just by, again, from considering the speed profile of the track. Remember, we identified that we were spinning about 140 kilometer average speed. So we are going to get a huge benefit from downforce. If we were doing a track where low speed cornering was a little bit more, we had a higher percentage of time spent in that region, and then our speed histogram was showing and indicating a lower speed average, then we would know that we need a little bit more mechanical grip, meaning we would probably have a little bit softer suspension to give us that mechanical grip. One other thing that we want to do when we're considering the aerodynamic sensitivity of a car is going to look at the traction circle. So I'm just going to pull that up right now. It's under suspension and then traction circle. So what the traction circle tells us is this graph right here is going to tell us lateral acceleration versus longitudinal acceleration. But more importantly are the ones on the right, which are the top right is longitudinal acceleration versus speed. So braking and acceleration as a function of speed. And then the bottom right, which is lateral acceleration as a function of speed, which is our cornering. So I'm going to look at the top right, and you can tell how sensitive this car is to aerodynamic downforce by the slope of this line. So negative G's are going to be braking, and you can see how much of increase we get in longitudinal acceleration as a function of speed. So here at 1G, we're at 100 kilometers per hour, sorry. We're not able to get much above 2Gs. We're not, doing any 3 or 4Gs. But if we're at 200 kilometers per hour, 250 kilometers per hour, we're able to pull 4 to 5 Gs. So you can see this car is very sensitive to downforce. And because this track plays well to a high downforce car, it means that we probably want to focus that with our car setup. So we're going to set up the car with more downforce in mind than mechanical grip. So it means we're going to have a little bit stiffer suspension, which is going to cause the angle of attack to be a little bit more stable, and we're not going to have as much ride height variation on that front wing. So the next thing that we want to consider for the track is asking ourselves how bumpy the track is. And this is going to help us tune things like our dampeners, but also things like the differential. A lot of times people don't realize this, but whenever you're braking into a really bumpy zone, your differential's more likely to unlock on the coast ramp side. So to do this, we are going to go back to the track map, but instead of looking at the states, we're going to be looking at bumpiness. So what bumpiness is going to show us is how bumpy the track is, and then at what areas that bumpiness occurs. So you can see just by looking at the graph, the blue sections are where there's no bumpiness, and then the yellow are where our suspension speed exceeds a certain limit and kicks into high speed dampening, which is typically occurs whenever the road is bumpy. And we can see into turn 1 we have a fair amount of bumpiness, and then some into sector 3 here, especially on the exit off of that chicane, which is a killer. There's a actual almost an altitude change there, going downward. But again, this is really important. So one thing that I personally do for my setups is use Catalunya turn 1 to adjust my coast ramp angle. that turn is very bumpy in the braking zone. So I want to make sure that I set my coast ramp so I don't get any unlocking there. Because if I set my differential to not unlock in that bumpy area, that's the most bumpy braking zone. So I'm not going to get any unlocking anywhere else. So that's kind of the design point is right there. But again, if we were setting up the dampeners, this is not that bumpy of a track. Catalunya is a built racetrack. It's not a street circuit. If I were to load up like Long Beach, you would see a lot more bumpiness. Well, if it was more bumpy, I would probably want to adjust my dampers to accommodate for that. So it's really important that you consider how bumpy a track is to make those setup adjustments. And one of the last things that we want to consider when considering a track analysis is we need to look at what tires we think are going to get worked the hardest. So the way we do that is we go to the suspension tab and we're going to go back to traction circle. And what we're looking for is to see the region where the most data samples are at on the outside of the traction circle. So just by looking and kind of getting a guesstimate, it looks like right in this region to me is where I see the most data samples. And what that is the rear left tire. Catalunya has a lot of high-speed right-hand turns, which means that rear left tire is really going to get loaded, which is where all these data samples are at. So whenever I'm looking at the car setup, as I'm making adjustments, I want to be keeping a close eye on that rear left tire. If not for temperatures, if the track temperature is a little bit cooler, I definitely want to keep an eye on it for tire wear. If I'm noticing that rear left tire is overheating or it's wearing at a really high rate, I'm going to need to make setup adjustments to keep it in check. So again, it's really important just to identify that in the data set before you start working on the setup itself. Well, that's going to be the end of the video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys learned a lot. If you have any questions, please reach out to us on the Discord. The link will be in the description down below or in the comment section. I try to reply and comment to as many people that comments on the videos as possible. Again, this is video 2 of the series. We're going to be doing more videos as the weeks go on. We try to release one video every week. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, follow the playlist. Only videos will be coming out over the next coming weeks. Lots of videos, lots of things like tuning workflows or tuning for specific components. But that's going to conclude it, guys. I hope you guys have a good day, and I'll check you guys next week.